first lived in Latvia as a diplomat between 1996 and 1999, a few years after Latvia regained independence from the crumbling Soviet Union. I returned to live in Latvia in 2022. This podcast series is based on my observations and experience, with some history and comparisons with my home country of England, on aspects of life in Latvia and things to see and experience. On Jelgava, the capital that vanished and the Soviet city that replaced it. This is the story of the ancient capital of the Duchy of Courland, now part of Latvia, which was destroyed in the Second World War and rebuilt as a Soviet manufacturing city. Since Latvia regained independence in 1991, Jelgava has transformed into a university city. You can look in one direction and see Soviet panel housing blocks, and turn in another to face the stunning architectural work of Rastrelli. Join me as we board a train from Riga Central Station for the 50-kilometre journey to Jelgava. We are on a new Vivi train, which is very comfortable but slow as it stops at every station along the route. It gives us time to observe the flat Zemgala scenery of agricultural fields. Soon we will see rising blocks of housing and some redundant factories. But peer through that and you will see a palace beside the river. We are about to arrive in Jelgava. I ask myself, how did this place go from a Baroque ducal capital to a mostly Soviet low-rise city with only fragments of its past? And what does that feel like when you walk it today? From Mitau to Jelgava and a lost capital. A settlement existed here between the Lilupa and Driksa rivers from about the 10th century in the lands of Semigalians. In 1265, the Livonian order built a castle on an island in the river called Pilsala as a southern fortress against the Semigalians and Lithuanians. Livonian order were German crusaders, the Livonian branch of the Teutonic Knights, who conquered and governed much of what is now Latvia and Estonia. Orders to construct a fortified castle had come from Bishop Wilhelm Modena some 40 years earlier. However, the Semigalians were NIMBYs, not in my backyarders, and had resisted its construction on their ancient trading site. The castle was eventually built by the master of the Livonian order, Conrad von Mandern. A Livonian rhymed chronicle records that the Semigalians were so unhappy with this new castle by the Lilupa River that they ambushed the order's troops not long after it was built, and the castle, well constructed, saved the life of the master of the order. The castle became the residence of the district governor of the Livonian order and his subordinates, fellow knights. The town became known in German as Mitau, and later in Latvian as Jelgava. It became the capital of the Duchy of Courland and Semigalia in 1561, a semi-independent state under Polish-Lithuanian supremacy. 5 years later, the Duke of Courland and Semigalia, Gotthard Kettler, chose Jelgava Castle as his residence and moved there with his court, after a few renovation works were completed, of course. The Dukes of Courland were absurdly ambitious for such a small duchy. They established colonies in Tobago in the Caribbean and Gambia in West Africa and governed from Jelgava. This quiet city in Latvia was once the centre of a tiny colonial empire, the world's smallest state to have colonies. You can listen to the full story in my podcast episode on Tobago. The Kettler dynasty ended in 1737, and Ernst Johann Biron was elected as the new ruler of Courland and Semigalia. He clearly disliked the idea of living in an old castle, so he had it demolished and replaced with a brand new palace as his residence. This palace was built in 2 stages by Bartolomeo Francesco Rastrelli, famous for the St. Petersburg Winter Palace, featuring a U-shaped Baroque Rococo design with sumptuous interiors. It is considered one of Latvia's most outstanding surviving architectural monuments. Constructed by a renowned imperial architect, this provincial palace gives Jelgava a slightly off-brand St. Petersburg vibe. In the early 1980s, I visited St. Petersburg, then called Leningrad. Soviet Union tourism described the city as the Venice of the North. Buildings like the Winter Palace and Hermitage were very grand, and there were a few canals as well. As a diplomat in Moscow, I needed permission from the Soviet authorities to travel outside the city. This was arranged by the embassy's fixer, who also booked my accommodation. That turned out to be a suite in the grandest hotel in St. Petersburg. When I returned to Moscow and boasted about the suite, I was scolded by the embassy leaders. Apparently, that suite was reserved only for ambassadors and ministers. Not my fault, Gov. In 1795, Duke Peter Biron sold the Duchy of Courland and Semigalia to Russia, which absorbed the territory into the Russian Empire. The palace housed the administration of the Courland province of Russia until the early 20th century. Jelgava lost its sovereign court, but remained an important provincial city and railway hub. The 19th century saw the development of broad streets and mansions owned by Baltic German nobility, resulting in Jelgava having one of Latvia's best preserved old towns before World War II. At that time, it had a multi-ethnic character, including Baltic Germans, Latvians, and a significant Jewish community from the 16th century onward. Several early Zionist leaders originated from Jelgava. By the 1930s, Jelgava was a prosperous regional centre with an elegant old town, cobbled streets, and churches like St. Anne's, alongside the palace as a landmark. Today's largely Soviet rebuilt city overlays these vanished layers. Standing on Pilsala Island today, it's hard to imagine that almost 90% of that city would soon disappear. Soviet Jelgava, a city rebuilt from ruins. The next chapter in Jelgava's history is marked by destruction, occupation, and rebuilding in a completely different style and under a different ideology. In 1940, following the Nazi-Soviet pact, the Soviet Union occupied and annexed Latvia. Jelgava was incorporated into the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic. However, between 1941 and 1944, German forces occupied the city. During this period, German and Latvian auxiliary police carried out mass shootings of the city's Jews, and the main synagogue in Jelgava centre was burnt down. The genocide of Jews in Latvia is, unfortunately, a forgotten part of the country's history. Heavy street fighting and repeated air raids between the Red Army and the German forces devastated the city in 1944, with around 90% of Jelgava's buildings destroyed, including the Courland Provincial Museum and most of the historic city centre. Jelgava became a front line in the war from late July to October 1944. German counterattacks failed and the front moved when the Wehrmacht retreated, leaving Jelgava in ruins. After the war, the Soviets faced a largely flattened city. Instead of reconstructing the old town, they rebuilt Jelgava in typical post-war Soviet style: wide streets, functional apartment blocks, and monumental public buildings. Jelgava became a significant industrial city. Large factories were built or expanded, including a large sugar factory and assembly facilities for the Riga Autobus Factory, RAF. The company relocated from Riga to Jelgava to increase its assembly line capacity. You can imagine trains delivering workers and parts to assemble the RAF minibuses. The ruins of the factory still remain in Jelgava. Do listen to my podcast episode on the Latvia minibus for the story about this iconic and ubiquitous vehicle in the Soviet Union. Secretly, I love the van, and I took a trip in one during that podcast. To power this new industrial city, Russians migrated there from across the Soviet Union, creating a very different ethnic dynamic than in the pre-war period. The Soviet policies of collectivization and urbanization were also promoted during this time. Kolkhozes and state farms reshaped the countryside, and many rural Latvians moved into towns like Jelgava for industrial jobs and to live in apartments with amenities. People left small single-farm homesteads, viensētas, for the concrete blocks of Jelgava. There is a local legend that says what remained of Jelgava's old town after the war was further destroyed when the Soviets used the ruins as a set for a film about the siege of Stalingrad, blowing up surviving historic buildings for authentic scenes. Imagine, instead of carefully restoring 18th century houses, they wired them with explosives for the perfect war shot. Although the lore may not be true, it sounds so very Soviet. Imagine the scene in the 1980s, a Soviet city with broad avenues, standardized prefabricated housing blocks, a largely erased old centre, yet still anchored by the hulking, fire-damaged, then restored Rastrelli Palace. This is where it gets interesting. When independence was regained and the Soviet Union collapsed, the transition to a modern Jelgava as a place negotiating between its Baroque aristocratic past and Soviet working-class reality. Present-day Jelgava, student city on the Lilupa. Today, Jelgava is often called the student capital of Latvia, thanks to the Latvian University of Life Sciences and Technologies, whose main building is in Jelgava Palace itself. The palace, once a ducal residence and later severely damaged in the Second World War, has been rebuilt and now houses the university's administration and some faculties. In fact, since 1961, during the Soviet era, it housed the Latvian Academy of Agriculture, which became the Latvian University of Agriculture, and, since 2018, the Latvian University of Life Sciences. It provides a nice contrast. You can watch students in hoodies cycling into a building designed by the Tsar's star architect. Jelgava still retains much of its Soviet-era architecture. Many neighbourhoods are characterised by post-war blocks and functional civic buildings, giving them a more nondescript appearance than Riga or Cesis. However, there is an area of 18th to 19th century small buildings called the Old Town Quarter in the west of the city. The streets have been recobbled, and some buildings have been restored, with information plaques for curious tourists. St Anne's Lutheran Church nearby is the oldest surviving building in Jelgava. A personal anecdote. I got married at Rundala Palace. Do listen to on Rundala Palace episode, which is a half-hour drive from Jelgava, or about an hour in the old Volga car we were in. The evening reception was at Hotel Jelgava, overlooking the Baroque Palace of Jelgava. To clear the cobwebs the next morning, we all went on a chartered boat trip and ate solyanka soup, supposedly a hangover cure. Jelgava has prioritised investing in public art and sculptures, especially on Passala, where 3 fireclay sculpture parks showcase works from international symposiums. There's also the Wheeler Time 100 stones marking 100 years of Latvian statehood, creating a physical timeline you can literally walk around. Latvia tends to commemorate time and history in its landscape. We visited the annual ice sculpture show, featuring international artists. Jelgava blends city and nature. There are boardwalks along the Svelta River and the Palienas meadows, where semi-wild horses graze within sight of the city. There is also an observation tower where, on a clear day, you can look out over the floodplains and maybe spot those horses. Modern Jelgava is an industrial city located on the flat Zemgala plain, with its historic centre almost entirely disappeared, a Baroque palace now used as a university, Soviet-era blocks, and a growing mosaic of sculptures, memorial stones, and ecological projects. Another view. I wanted to find out what it was like to live there. So I had a chat with Joe Horgan, an American based in Jelgava, who produces the Latvia Weekly podcast. Thanks for joining me, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to ask you, as a resident of Jelgava, what you like about living there.
I like most things, honestly, about living in Jelgava. It was actually, so when I first came to Latvia in 2013, I was placed as part of my scholarship that I was on at a local school in Jelgava, Jelgava Spitala, now State Gymnasium, and also the university there. And I've continued working there for, the whole time I've been in Latvia. The year after my scholarship, though, I actually moved to Riga, and I was traveling to Jelgava every day and kind of hoping to get back to Jelgava. And I have people ask me, like, oh, don't you want to live in Riga? Like, why do you want to live out there? But no, I really love the size of it. I'm not a big city person. I love how relaxed things are. There aren't, maybe quite as many tourism objects as there might be in, Riga or Liepāja, but it's a very, very comfortable place to live. It's very, very relaxed, and, pretty much anything that you need to buy, you can get there. And if not, it's only 45 minutes from Riga. You can jump on the train. It's very, very easy to get to Riga. It's a great place to raise my kids. There's a lot of great playgrounds nearby. My daughters, who are 7 and 5 now, can ride their bikes pretty easily. And, it's a great place, I would say, to raise a family. I like it a lot. There really isn't anywhere else I'd want to live.
Thank you. And for someone who's visiting Jelgava as a tourist, a day trip,
Mhm.
any tips on what to do or go to or see or experience?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I would say is definitely visit the St. Trinity Tower. So, as I'm sure you mentioned earlier in the episode, unfortunately, it was very badly damaged during World War II. And the communist officials running Jelgava after the war during the occupation, being the not very romantic people that they were, instead of trying to rebuild it in some way, the most of the church they basically took down aside from the tower and just built student dorms over it. But the tower itself was renovated in 2010 completely. And now it is a really, really cool, not just tourist information center, but a viewing platform from the very top. And there's exhibitions which change pretty frequently on every floor. And there have been restaurants from time to time. So hopefully by the time whenever it is that you're listening right now, there'll still be a restaurant on the penultimate floor. But those can be kind of fleeting from time to time. But when there is a restaurant there, it's a really, really great place to eat. So definitely the tower is a great place to visit. You can get there like 10-15 minute walk by train, from the train station. And then, of course, going out to the Palace Island, the palace itself, although it's extremely impressive from the outside, the inside it's basically just like a university building, which, I work there and, I love working there and everything, but, it's not like Roondale, when you walk around and it's like this, massive work of art. But definitely the outside of the palace is great. But if you walk further past the palace, you can go to the this major kind of like wooden tower where you can see the wild horses who live there, which please do not feed them. You're not supposed to feed the horses. So those would be kind of the major places I would suggest going out to visit. But also, yeah, the Gerda Elias Art Museum is great. Art and History Museum. The top floor is Art Museum with a exhibition from a recent artist, and then the left side is a permanent exhibition about Elias himself, and then the bottom floor is devoted to Latvian history. So definitely worth going out to see and visiting at some point if you're able to make it out to Jelgava.
All very positive. Thanks for those tips, Joe. But anything you dislike about Jelgava?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very patriotic about Jelgava. In my own podcast, I try to point out that we're a Jelgava podcast. My former co-host also was a lifelong born and bred Jelgavnieks. So I don't like to air out any grievances of Jelgava, but yeah, I mean, anywhere that you live, obviously, it's not a utopia ever. And I would say definitely, the biggest kind of sticking point that people have about Jelgava, for those of us who live there, um, they've been building a market for many, many years, which you can read about in Latvian media, which supposedly was finished a few months ago, but still not open. And it was supposed to be finished. I don't even know how many years ago, but yeah. So that's a big sticking point. It'd be nice to have this new market. Also, no movie theater, so although it's easy to get to Riga and watch the movies there, it is frustrating when, we go to Liepāja or even like Sigulda, which is much smaller than Jelgava, and there's a movie theater there, but that's okay. It gives us a reason to go to Riga. But no, for the most part, I don't know. I mean, I don't have really much to complain about. If I need something that isn't in Jelgava, then I can just get to Riga pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for joining me, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for having me.
A perfect day trip to Jelgava. Jelgava is easy to reach by train, car, or coach. This is a short one-day walking tour. Start in the centre at the Holy Trinity Church Tower, which is over 400 years old and now functions as an exhibition and viewing tower rather than a working church. Inside you'll find modern, interactive historical displays about Jelgava and the surrounding region. At the top, a 37-metre-high viewing platform offers a panoramic view of the city, rivers, palace, Soviet blocks and meadows. From the tower, walk across the river towards Jelgava Palace, the big Rastrelli Baroque ensemble on the river island. Even if interior access is limited due to the university, you can still see the facade, stroll in the park, and if possible, visit the vault of the Dukes, the crypt where the Courland Dukes are buried. The facade of the palace is the best bit, simply stunning. Cross the Mitava Bridge to Pasta Island. There is a tunnel beneath the road bridge. The bridge itself offers scenic views and has become a minor attraction. It's a spot to pause, take photos, and look back at the palace and city. On the island, explore 3 distinct fireclay sculpture parks created during an international symposium. Each sculpture tells its own story, some abstract, some figurative. Check them out. Don't miss the Jelgava student sculpture near the bridge, where locals say you can make a wish if you touch it, a charming little ritual for visitors. Then head into the Old Town Quarter in the western part of Jelgava to see the remaining 18th to 19th century low-rise buildings with restored cobbles and plaques. Also, visit St. Anne's Lutheran Church, the city's oldest building, and imagine what the pre-war streets must have felt like when they extended far beyond this remnant. If the weather and time permit, take a quick trip to the Svelta River boardwalks or Palienis Meadows, maybe combined with a visit to the Jelgava Observation Tower, where you might see semi-wild horses grazing on the floodplain. You will notice how close nature is to the city, 1 foot on cobblestones, the other in wetlands. The lost capital that can still be felt. Jelgava is a place where a once grand ducal capital was nearly erased by war and ideology, then reconstructed with concrete and industry, and now gradually layers on students, sculptures, meadows, and memories. If Riga is Latvia's shop window, Jelgava is its attic trunk. Some things lost, some salvaged, and a few treasures that only reveal themselves if you take the time to look. If you have the opportunity, do take that day trip to Jelgava and see how much of the lost capital you can still feel beneath your feet.